Nearly 15 years ago, I found myself standing in a foggy clear-cut, photographing a friend atop the stump of a giant old-growth red cedar tree. This tree would have been more than 500 years old before it was cut down on the west coast of Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And I still find this image as haunting today as I did back then. And standing there in the rain, I felt sick to my stomach at what I saw around me. I thought, how could an incredible rainforest be allowed to be turned into a scene of such devastation? And in the age of social media, why weren't more people documenting and sharing images of both these forests' beauty and their destruction? I was 25 years old then when I decided to dedicate my life to photographing old-growth forests to help see them saved, co-founding the Ancient Forests Alliance, which today is BC's leading organization working for the protection of old-growth forests. And for those who are unfamiliar, BC is home to some of the world's finest remaining old-growth temperate rainforests. These forests were globally rare to begin with, and today, sadly, most have since been lost. But where they remain, they're home to unique and endangered species and are among the best carbon storehouses of any terrestrial ecosystem on the planet. And stepping into an old-growth forest is like stepping back in time. Your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, and your senses come alive. As the light cascades in through the forest canopy, you're surrounded by a million shades of green and gold. The ground is soft and spongy beneath your feet, and the sounds of birds and creeks gently filter through the forest. It's a place of peace and tranquility. And hidden amongst these incredible landscapes are also some of the largest and oldest living organisms on the planet. Trees here can grow to be as wide as a living room, as tall as a downtown skyscraper, and live to be more than 1,000 years old. In fact, some of these trees would have already been 500 years old when Shakespeare was writing his plays, and others predate the signing of the Magna Carta. And it's humbling to stand before these gentle giants like this one, a western red cedar on Flores Island in a Howsett territory, the largest tree I've ever found. However, despite growing up here on Vancouver Island, I, like most people, didn't encounter trees like these. So where did they all go? Well, the dark green on this map represents the original extent of productive old-growth forests across Vancouver Island around the time of European colonization. Productive old-growth forests being those capable of growing big trees like the ones you see in many of my photographs. And to early settlers, it would have appeared as though you could never run out. However, this shocking time-lapse shows just how widespread the impacts of old-growth logging have been over the past 150 years. Today, after more than a century of industrial logging, we've lost over 80% of the productive old-growth forests across BC, including well over 90% of the valley bottoms where the biggest trees grow and the richest biodiversity resides. And old-growth logging, it's not a thing of the past. In fact, on average, over the past 5 years, more than 300 football fields worth of old-growth forests are still cut down across the province every single day, never to be seen again. And this is what that looks like. So why does this matter? We often hear that forests are a renewable resource and that logging is done sustainably. We're told that the industry plants 2 trees for every 1 that it cuts down. But the question here isn't whether trees grow back, as they generally do. The question is, do the ensuing second-growth tree plantations adequately replicate the old-growth forests that they're replacing? And the answer is, they don't. Old-growth forests are highly complex ecosystems that have evolved over centuries to even millennia. They're home to endangered species, such as the marble murrelet, spotted owl, and mountain caribou, which depend on them for their survival. They filter clean water for communities and wild salmon. They store vast amounts of carbon that help mitigate climate change. They're pillars of a multi-billion-dollar tourism industry, and they're an integral part of many First Nations cultures that have evolved in old-growth forests since time immemorial. In stark contrast, second-growth tree plantations may look green on the outside, but are often brown and barren on the inside. This is due to their dense canopies, which shade out most of the sunlight from reaching the forest floor. And these tree farms, they lack the structural complexity that are found in old-growth forests that many species depend upon. And these young forests are also typically relogged every 50 to 60 years, never to become old growth again. And beyond the environmental impacts, this large-scale conversion of old-growth forests into second-growth tree plantations contributes to the concept of generational amnesia, the idea that each new generation inherits a world that's much different than the one that came before it, but comes to accept it as the new normal. Often, the only evidence of the once grand forest that existed here are the monumental stumps that are hidden amongst the hillsides. So, how do we combat this amnesia? And how do we remind people that in some cases, these ancient forests still exist and they need our help to protect them? Well, that's where my work as a conservation photographer, big tree hunter, and National Geographic explorer comes into play. I've spent the past 15 years of my life embarking on what I consider the greatest treasure hunt on planet Earth. With my camera in hand, I work to explore and document endangered ancient forests, tracking down some of the largest living trees in the world. And conservation photography, it plays a critical role in our campaigns by bringing these remote areas to life and getting them in front of the eyes of millions of people around the world who in turn can help advocate for their protection. And to do this, I employ various types of technology, such as satellite imagery and canopy height models, which help me determine where the groves of the biggest trees might be. This information gets plugged into my phone, along with any potential logging plans, and from there, I hit the road. And that's where the real adventure begins. Because the coastal temperate rainforests of British Columbia are some of the most wild, rugged, and beautiful landscapes on Earth. Everything here is on a supersized scale. And big tree hunting, it's a bit of an extreme sport that involves a lot of bushwhacking in the most literal sense of the term. This is my friend Ian suffering in some sharp salmon berries. But the risks are always worth the reward, as so often I find myself standing in some of the most magnificent forests that exist. These forests, they fill me with a sense of reverence and respect. And like an old friend, I've come to visit many of them time and time again. And having survived for hundreds, if not thousands of years, you expect them to be there when you return. Except many times, they aren't. Far too often, I've had to witness the gut-wrenching loss of a forest that can never be replaced. A forest that would have been home to innumerable species, some of which science would have yet to have a chance to identify. Forests so grand that I would think, surely this one is too beautiful, too special to be destroyed. But time and time again, I've learned that the appetite of industry knows no bounds, and that without real, firm protections, ancient forests will continue to fall. Forests like this one of my favorites in the Kaikous Valley in Dididat territory on Vancouver Island. And as I stood there that day, on the edge of existence, behind this tree lay the chainsaw that would cut it down the very next day. And since the fate of this forest was sadly all but sealed, I decided to capture these trees' final portraits. Because despite having just recorded the hottest year on record, with mega fires and floods sweeping across our country and the rest of the world, with news about the extinction and climate crisis making headlines every single day, right here in Canada, the destruction of old-growth forests, which are our best natural defenses against these issues, is still taking place at alarming rates. And this destruction, it leaves me angry and upset and with a deep sense of ecological grief. So how might we go about protecting these forests, and what progress towards that goal has been made? Well, early on in the history of our organization, we were successful in having an incredible ancient forest known as Avatar Grove protected. This was a forest that I came across while out searching for big trees. And we accomplished this by building a large-scale, broad-based movement that included diverse voices, such as those from the local small business community and the Chamber of Commerce in Port Renfrew. And since then, Avatar Grove has helped bolster the local economy through big tree tourism, proving that these forests truly are worth more standing. The success of this campaign also underscored the importance of building support beyond your traditional base in the conservation movement. More recently, under pressure, the BC government is committed to protecting 30% of the province by 2030, a move that would essentially double the amount of protected area over the next 7 years, bringing it in line with international conservation commitments. This would add in an additional area of roughly 14 million hectares, or more than 4 times the size of Vancouver Island, a huge leap forward. And beyond that, over $1 billion, $1 billion, was just announced to support nature conservation in British Columbia, including for the protection of old-growth forests, through the creation of new Indigenous protected areas. Yeah. This is the largest funding package for nature conservation in Canadian history, and something that we're thrilled to see arrive after making it a central priority of our campaigns for many years now. Some of this funding will go to support First Nations in building conservation-based economies that provide sustainable economic alternatives to the revenues of old-growth logging, which many communities are still dependent upon. This could be in industries such as ecotourism, clean energy projects, sustainable seafood harvesting, and more. And this support is vital, as in British Columbia, First Nations consent and shared decision-making is a legal necessity to establish new protected areas in their unceded territories. But there's still a critical part of the solution missing here, and that is that the BC government has yet to commit to aiming new protected areas at the most endangered ecosystems, such as the big tree old-growth forests, which have been virtually extinguished from the landscape and are still the most heavily targeted by the logging industry today. And we also need to address where our wood comes from. As I'm sure many people might be thinking, but TJ, don't you live in a house made of wood? Don't you use paper? Yes, like most people, I do. However, cutting down 1,000-year-old trees and turning them into 2x4s and toilet paper is like grinding up castles in Europe into gravel to make highways. It's unethical and it's unnecessary. Most of the rest of the world is now logging second, third, and fourth growth forests, and it's time that we make a swift transition to a truly sustainable, value-added second growth forest industry so that we can both protect old growth forests and sustain forestry jobs at the same time. And we have a global responsibility to do the right thing, because old growth forests are the antidote to what ails our world. There's increasing recognition that there's no way we can solve the climate crisis without drawing down vast amounts of atmospheric carbon into protected forests and other ecosystems while we're making emission reductions. And these forests, they're also havens for our physical and mental well-being in increasingly challenging times. And most critically, as we speak, for the first time in 30 years, policies are being developed in British Columbia that will determine the fate of most of these forests for years to come. So this is our window of opportunity. And that's why we need your help. Just a few weeks ago, I captured this photo in yet another threatened but incredible forest here on Vancouver Island. I don't want to take another after photo. So stand with me and help us protect these irreplaceable ancient forests for our generation and for those still to come. Thank you.